Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to the virtual book launch of Participatory Democratic Innovations in Southeast Europe, How to Engage in Flawed Democracies. The collection that we are going to present today features 11 chapters and was edited by Irena Fiket, Vujo Ilić, Gazela Putar-Draško, and myself, Čedomir Markov. We are all researchers here at the Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory at the University of Belgrade. The book was published by Routledge in their Southeast European Studies book series and is completely available in open access. You can find the link in the chat session, and I'll make sure to remind you a couple more times during the event to go there and download your copy. Obviously, we are extremely happy and proud that the book is finally out and that we get to share it with you. It took 2 years to complete. It features 11 chapters, involves 20 contributors. So we see this event as a celebration of the hard work we put into it rather than a formal book presentation. So we will start today with a short background on how the book came about. Following that, we will hear a very short teaser for each chapter from our contributors. And in the end, we are interested in hearing your questions, impressions, and comments. So without further ado, I would like to ask the lead editor, Irena Fiket, to join us and maybe take us back to 2022 and a little conference that we organized titled Revitalizing Democracy Through Participatory Democratic Innovations, which we organized here at the Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory, which I think marks the inception of this book. Irena, am I right?
Yes, but thank you, Chedo. Thank you, everybody, for coming. There are many faces I didn't see for a long time, so hi to everybody. I will go back even further because I want to say that our book is actually as a result of the research done within the project Active Citizenship, promoting and advancing innovative democratic practices in Western Balkans that we actually started in 2018, together with University of Graz, Torino, Skopje, Sarajevo, and civil society organization Belgrade Center for Political Excellence from Serbia. And that this project is actually financed by the Jean Monnet Erasmus program of the European Commission. And that project actually finished with an international conference, Cheda mentioned, where we gathered people also from outside of the consortium and where the idea for the book was finally developed. So I will start with the idea of the initial project and then say something about the book. I will try to be short. The initial project focused on investigating the interaction between democratic innovation promoted by in the EU countries and bottom-up citizen mobilizations in the Western Balkan countries. Our aim was initially to bridge this research gap between those two models of political action, but we also aimed at promoting citizen participation in the Western Balkans through these innovative democratic practices because we saw them actually as a way to foster political culture that would build strong citizen resilience to growing anti-democratic tendencies in the region. But after the final conference of the project, we realized that we needed to broaden the geographical area and explore Southeast Europe. And we did that in the book we're actually presenting today. So even though this is the first book that focuses on democratic, participatory, and deliberative innovations in the region, we believe that our contribution is not only because we are the first one to talk about this issue in the region, but also because it's particularly relevant now when even the basic principles of liberal and representative democracy are being challenged in the region. So going back to our main topic, we departed from the assumption in this book that the new arenas and modes of the engagement pioneered by the social movements, as well as deliberative experimentation promoted by social and political actors, can be seen as an important part of the answer to the democratic crisis. And considering the context of the growing autocratization that has been spreading also globally in the recent years, not only in this region, we engaged with the newest way of appeals for participatory and deliberative democracy as remedy for that crisis. So on the one hand, we wanted to understand how new social movements in Southeast Europe try to engage in participatory democratic innovations, and we explore how they experiment with new ideas of democracy. Therefore, the social movement struggle to initiate debate on transforming conventional politics is one of the topics underlying this whole edited volume. On the other hand, we follow this growing interest of the European Union and its member states in promoting and encouraging active citizenship through various participatory and deliberative tools and methods. What we saw is that while this is for us is important, this book is that while efforts to institutionalize democratic innovations are underway in the EU, in Southeast Europe somehow stays behind these efforts, and deliberative institutions are rare, and local governments often hinder citizen participation. We talk about this in the book also. And given the lack of awareness about deliberative institutions in Southeast Europe, we also aim to learn from social movement practices. So this is what we did in this book. And overall, we actually, this volume seeks to contribute to the debate on democratic innovation dynamics in Southeast Europe. And we explore, therefore, how bottom-up and top-down approaches impact social and political landscape, offering insights into citizen empowerment and democratization. We do hope that this book will serve as a guide and inspiration for those involved in democratic innovation. Not only, we don't want only academic contribution, but that we can inspire some, other actors in these challenging circumstances. And we hope that the examples presented here can encourage steps towards to institutionalization of innovative practices, maybe leading to a more inclusive and participatory democracy in Southeast Europe. Contribution, and I will talk for another minute more, just to say that contribution in this volume approach social movement mobilization and deliberative experimentation from different angles. And I will just briefly delineate the structure of the book and then leave the floor to the authors. We have this part one, when we establish the context by delving into contemporary debates about the role of participation in democracy. We explore the circumstances that have pushed democratic innovation to the forefront of discussion on reinvigorating democracy in the region. In part two, we shifted attention to the specific cases through Southeast Europe, where social movements, civil society organizations, and citizens actually join efforts to create and offer different models, participatory models for functioning of institutions. And finally, in the third part, we dedicated our attention to the innovations that led to institutionalization of participatory practices. I will just leave the floor now to Čeda, who will invite speakers of the specific contributions. And bye again.
Well, thank you so much, Irena, for giving us this framework for today's discussion. I have no follow-up questions because you covered everything that I think it's important to start a discussion, and I think we can move on, as you said, to the individual chapters. And obviously, we start with part one, which is titled "Context of the Participatory Democratic Innovations in Southeast Europe." And the chapter that opens it was written by Nenad Marković, Ivan Damjanovski, and Zoran Ilijevski, all from the St. Cyril and Methodius University in Skopje, North Macedonia. Their chapter is titled "Social Movements, Active Citizenship, and Democratic Innovation, an Overview." Nenad, do you care telling us a bit more about this chapter?
Yes, Čedo, thank you so much. First, a great thanks and oral love to the editors for the effort in the last 2-3 years that this edited volume comes out. So thank you so much, and it's really an honor to be the first text in the first chapter of the book. Can you hear me? The picture kind of froze. Okay, it's only with Čedo probably the problem. So I will just briefly, not to take away your time, so I will just briefly present what our chapter is all about. As Čedo already said, it's the first chapter of the most generic part of the book, in fact, that introduces the whole problematics. So it's named "Social Movements, Active Citizenship, and Democratic Innovation, an Overview." It's an introductory theoretical chapter that examines the connection between social movements, active citizenship, and democratic innovation, something that is not very frequently done in academia these days. It addresses the crisis of participatory democracies, mistrust in the institutions and decision-making processes, and lack of innovation in the different modalities of participation in democratic processes. So the paper briefly analyzes social movements and as democratizing agents, as well as the reasons for re-emergence of social movements in Southeast Europe, across the region mostly. It also analyzes the concept of democratic innovation brought from a theoretical and empirical perspective, tries to make a connection between both. Both phenomena in modern societies emerge as a reaction to the deficits of representative democracy to provide a wider platform for inclusion of diversity of interests and values of common people. While the modus operandi of social movements has been the accumulation and expression of protest energy in regards to failing institutional designs of democracy, innovative democratic practices seek quasi-institutional mechanisms to fill the gap in democratic participation by promoting democratization from below. This tension has also been evident in scholarly research, where the two disciplines have been reluctant to engage in interdisciplinary endeavors. There are two agendas, competing agendas that we speak about. Contrast between a social movement research agenda that emphasizes the role of conflict, grassroots contention, and extra-institutional deliberation, and a civil society research agenda which favors a more structured, moderated, and peaceful platform for democratic participation based on a cooptation and cooperation. So through theoretical and empirical contextualization of the interaction between these often tensional concepts, the chapter argues that more emphasis should be put on notions of complementarity between their functions, between the two competing concepts that I mentioned. The chapter explores how innovative democratic practices can be utilized by social movements as a platform for realization of their policy demands. And finally, while social movements serve as a platform for raising the voices against exclusion of divergent and discontent societal groups from the political process, innovative democratic practices can serve as bottom-up platforms for channeling those voices into the institutional policy-making arenas, so you immediately see the compatibility. That would be all in brief. If there are any questions, I'm glad to answer, and we move on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nad. Yeah, after all individual chapters are presented, we will have time for a short Q&A session. And moving on, the next chapter is participation, responsiveness, interaction, the importance of epistemic checks and balances for the revitalization of democratic institutions, written by Andrija Šoć from the University of Belgrade.
Okay, many thanks. And thank you to all the editors and the other authors who are here and who contributed to creating this really unique and timely volume. So again, just briefly, the idea of this chapter is to establish what it is that is important for having fruitful participation in really any democratic state or any state that is at the democracy-autocracy spectrum. So what are the tools to analyze existing participatory institutions and activities, and how to, again, respond to theoretical challenges to participation that occur in the literature? Because, as we know, there are usually skeptical authors who say that issues are overly complex for ordinary citizens to always follow and gain expertise required to react in real time to policy changes. However, I try to give some sort of framework for how to build up participation that does correctly react in time and keeps in check governing structures when it comes to important societal policies. This is why we have tried to analyze three different concepts. So participation is one, and it is one that is central really in these debates when it comes to participatory innovations such as mini publics or juries, citizen assemblies, participatory budgets. This is an important metric for understanding to what degree, in what numbers at the local level, citizens are ready to join in the public debates. However, responsiveness and interaction are two important concepts that I think should supplement the notion of participation, in the sense that the responsiveness can track whether citizens are ready to react to different institutionalized policies that governments can try to propose. And as we know, in weakly democratic or autocratizing societies, it can often happen that political campaigns favor not optimal, let's just say, in that euphemistic sense, not optimal public policies that are not very good at the interest of the citizens, and are presented quite differently as something that is very good. So in order to have this detected, citizens have to react, to be informed, and to keep pressure on governing structures by acknowledging and showing that they're involved. So in that sense, this means that they're responsive to what happens. And in turn, governing structures then have to respond themselves to these kinds of pressures. And in the chapter, I also try to explain some different ways of participation, in the sense of having proactive participation, one that occurs before problems arise, and reactive participation, the one that occurs after something not so good happens. And one case that I analyze is lithium mining, which has been at the time of writing, and is again an important topic in this country. And overall, so just to finish with one sentence, overall, the paper tries to adopt this framework that is perhaps a bit more robust than just mentioning what are the models of participation with these types of concepts I mentioned, and to give way to analyze quality of participation in really any particular situation that might be prone for analyzing. Hopefully with also an opportunity to diagnose quality of participation by employing these concepts on any, again, particular case. So let's keep that for now as a short teaser. And again, if something comes up in the Q&A, I'm happy to clarify anything that comes up. Thank you again.
Thank you, Andrea. And the final chapter in part 1 is titled Political Participation in Southeast Europe, a Scoping Review, written by Vujo Ilić and myself. So Vujo, would you share a couple of words about our chapter?
Certainly. Can you hear me well? Yeah, okay. So I'm very glad to see so many familiar faces, and I'm really happy that this book is finally out. So Chadra and me were wondering what are the key features of the recent research agenda on political participation in Southeast Europe. We looked at the period from 2010 to 2022, so from the Great Recession to the winding down of the coronavirus pandemic. And we did a scoping review of almost 150 academic articles published on Web of Science, which cover 11 countries. So from Slovenia and Romania in the north, Albania, Bulgaria in the south, and everything in between. So we have some interesting findings about the modes of production of knowledge. We found expected correlation between countries' population size and the number of authors' affiliations, with some interesting outliers. For instance, Bulgaria and Serbia have very similar population sizes, but very few authors from Bulgaria are actually writing on this, whereas on the other half, like a lot of Serbian-affiliated authors are interested in political participation. We also found something very concerning, and that is almost non-existing cross-country cooperation of authors within the region. So even though there are obviously, even on this Zoom, a lot of people working on this in the region, we very seldomly publish together. So there's almost a silo effect present in the region. What we found, the change in this decade was a gradual increase in the number of articles. This is primarily driven by scholarly interest in unconventional forms of participation, so protest, civic activism, and so on, and also innovative modes of participation, so citizen assemblies, participatory budgeting, and so on. And so also the other thing that was driving this increase in publications is the rising emphasis of youth engagement in the region. So we found this a meaningful change in the publication patterns. We related these developments to the topic of disengagement from conventional institutions of participation, which was omnipresent, and also we related this to the deep roots of informal institutions and networks in the region. So this is a very interesting topic that I don't have much time to discuss. There are certainly some findings about the patterns of participation and the outcomes of political participation that we could relate to both the crisis of democracy in the region and also this presence of informal practices. But I will just skip to the main gaps that we identified. We identified, I think, 7 or 8 gaps in the literature that we kind of hope that other authors will pick up. I will just mention 3. One is that we don't know much about long-term effects of unconventional participation, so either protest or participatory innovation. And sure, these are newcomers to the literature, but we also noted that this agenda is basically ripening. So there have been mass protests in the region and civic activism for more than 10 years, and we should really look at the long-term effects that they have, if they have. Another thing that we noted is that there are very few studies that are dealing with the interactions of different actors or modes of participation. So for example, even though protests and voting participation are some of the most common forms of political participation, we don't know much about their interaction. And finally, at the individual level, we thought that we should understand better the generational differences, and especially the older adult political participation. So our societies are rapidly aging. We know a lot now about the youth, but we don't know much about older generations that are more and more important for the democracies in our countries. So thank you all for listening, and I'm happy to answer any of the questions.
Thank you so much, Vujo. And now I think it's time to move on to part 2, social movements and civil society experimentation, which brings several case studies on democratic innovation from the region. And it starts with a chapter titled Toward the Democratization of Urban Planning, a case study of 3 deliberative forums in Belgrade, written by Jovana Timotijević and Iva Čukić from the Ministry of Space Collective. So let's hear from Jovana.
Thank you, Čedo, and big thank you also from us to all the editors. We are very happy to be part of this edition. Okay, so as Čedo said, the title of the part 2 actually implies we are drawing from the examples of civil society experimentation with deliberation in order to investigate its potential for a collaborative approach to urban planning. The chapter is situated in the context of Serbia, although, to be honest, we might as well be talking about any former Yugoslav country where urban planning system faces persistent democratic deficit, resulting in cities being organized and shaped by particular privileged interests rather than the public interests, and followed by intensifying spatial conflicts and inequalities. So against such background, a civil society organization that both Eva and I belong to, called the Ministry of Space, conducted 3 deliberative forums in 2021 and 2022 on actual urban plans, so that were in adoption procedure concerning very specific territories within the city of Belgrade. This particularly means that the forums gathered citizens to discuss and propose different spatial solutions or principles of spatial planning, with the support from the experts in urban planning, green infrastructure, mobility, and other related areas. Even though some of the elements of these particular forums that we analyzed deviate from the common design of deliberative mini-publics, we believe they do provide sufficient evidence that deliberative approach can enhance inclusion, diversity, and legitimacy of urban plans, definitely compared to the existing planning procedures. So in the chapter, we offer an overview of the main elements of these deliberative processes and how they varied among the 3 examples. These variations include the recruitment approaches, treatment of the learning phase within the deliberation process, and also the scales of the urban plans in question, hence the complexity of the remit. We also present some of the challenges that both come from the wider political context in Serbia that has already been talked about, but also from the structural position of the actor who initiated and conducted this forum, this is a civic actor. Other than supporting the assumption that deliberation enhances participatory approach to urban planning, the findings also highlight the impact of these different mentioned elements of deliberative forum designs on the quality of discussions and the outcomes of the process. To finish, we hope certainly that this chapter shared valuable insights, at least for the similar context. But what we hope is that it's not only for the field of urban development and planning, because the spatial issues really interact with numerous other political processes in our societies. So these findings really might be useful for both scholars and for civic actors that are immersed on the urban struggles on the ground, but as well for those exploring the implementation, and we might say some adaptation, I'm sorry, of deliberative democracy formats and processes in very challenging contexts and conditions. So that's for now a very short overview.
Thank you so much, Jovana. And let's move on to the next chapter titled Heterotopia, Social Movements and Democratic Innovation. The case of Autonomous Cultural Center Metelkova Mesto in Ljubljana, Slovenia, written by Nathan Sigrist from the University of Gothenburg.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Great. Yeah, thank you. And thank you. I want to extend my gratitude to the editing team as well for this great work, and for the other authors who have written such great chapters and presented such interesting talks so far. I will be quite brief. In this chapter, I try to bring a few various quite separate literatures together. You know, there's literature on crisis of democracy, social movements related to democratic innovation, of course, and to put these in dialogue with the literature on heterotopia, which is a much smaller and more diverse literature. So I will elaborate a little bit on this concept to start. It was initially coined by Foucault, and then it has been developed in various directions, partly relating to democratic practices by scholars like David Harvey, Henri Lefebvre, and many others. And I think what it primarily seeks to do in each iteration is to capture dialectical spatial relations. So a heterotopia in this sense is an other space, which seeks to embody some sort of utopic vision, and manifest this by contrasting itself to an imagined mainstream or some sort of problem. And for me, I like to put this in relation to squatting and the squatters movement, because this is my big interest, scholarly interest. So I focus on how squatters movements in this chapter can construct these other spaces, and how they often are strongly characterized by these ideals of autonomy, political autonomy, self-governance, horizontality, real or true democracy, etc. So I see these as quite innovative and counter-public democratic contexts. And this is something I try to develop. And empirically, I focus on the famous case of Metelkova in Ljubljana. And I try to focus on a specific history and time under these conditions of democratic backsliding, how this heterotopic position, as I call it, allowed the space of Metelkova to both be articulated as a safekeeper of democratic openness under these conditions of de-democratizing trends in outside society, but at the same time it became a chief target in this assault on civil society. And to sum up, my chapter tries to capture this ambivalent dynamic and illustrate and explore how spaces of democratic innovation can become both a target and a source of defense for civic freedoms and participations under such conditions of democratic backsliding. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. Bojan Bacha is the author of the next chapter, which is the only reprint in this volume. It is titled Enacting Resistance, Performing Citizenship, Trajectories of Political Subjectification in the Post-Democratic Condition. Unfortunately, Bojan was not able to join us today, so I just want to say that his chapter examines the process of political subjectification of apolitical citizens through contentious practices in post-democratic Montenegro from 2000 to 2015. It explores 3 case studies, namely student, civic, and environmental movements that illustrate how citizens constituted themselves as collective political subjects through resistance. Three trajectories of political subjectification were identified: political becoming, political bonding, and political embodying. These processes allow citizens to regain their civic autonomy, to challenge dominant power relations, and to attain political legitimacy to think, speak, and act as relevant political actors. And we now move on to the final chapter in part 2, which is titled Agonist Reading of Social Movements in Liberal Democracies, the Case of the Social Movement for Truth and Justice, authored by Jasmin Hasanović, Valida Repovac-Nikšić, and Emina Adilović from the University of Sarajevo, Bosnia and Herzegovina. Jasmin will present this chapter.
Okay, thank you, Čedomir. So the idea for our chapter emerged from the realization that recent scholar interest in politics and democracy regarding Bosnia and Herzegovina focuses mostly on the country's complex political and social system and its weak central institutions. So here we were talking about, when we talk about those institutions, we mostly talk about the political and social framework of multi-level governance, which institutionalized post-conflict power-sharing mechanisms serving both as peace and state-building practices, forming a kind of constitutional ethnocracy. So after almost 3 decades living in such complex system, we see that kind of system basically, instead of democratizing our society, is moving the society and contributing to a trend of democratic regression and rising autocratization. So on the other hand, much of the academic discourse focused on the emergence of popular protests, citizens' assemblies, and plenums back in 2013 and 2014, which were believed to signal the emergence of a new relationship between citizens and politicians. However, what we saw that was lacking in the recent local and international literature related to social movements and active citizenship in Bosnia and Herzegovina was actually the interrogation of potential new forms of democratic innovation in the country. So we wrote about it 2 years ago, where we, using the lens of contentious politics, examined the relationship between the specific case of the Justice for Dženan, Pravda za Dženana movement, and the right-center political party, People and Justice, Narod I Pravda. So at the time, we concluded that it is doubtful whether we can, what we termed as a pragmatic symbiosis and alliance building with external actors, such as political parties or social movements, resulting in this particular case from the decision of the family of the murdered Dženan Memić to engage in politics through a political party, whether that kind of symbiosis represents a novel form of social political cooperation and thus creating opportunities for political and social change. So this chapter builds on that previous paper, but now examining the movement from a different theoretical perspective. So by noting the importance of empathy, emotion, and addressing the joint quest for accountability, by contrasting us, the regular citizens, against them, the alienate political elites, but without pointing to the movement's cooperation with the political party, we attempted to read the movement claims and demands through the agonistic theory. So here we primarily relied on the agonist theory of Chantal Mouffe and Ernesto Laclau, but using it as a descriptive tool to emphasize the importance of conflict in politics and institutions of democracy. Now, I will not delve into a detailed elaboration of our arguments, but I will just strive to make our work maybe provoking for further reading. But what I just want to say without spoiling it too much is that the movement, what we concluded, is that the movement failed to become a point of identification and formation of new political subjectivity beyond the essentialized and homogenized ethnic particularities. And although there were some kind of opportunities for cathartic experiences with the movement and its action, it remained only sporadic. So in other words, it failed to assume the role of an empty signifier which would remain open for wider systemic change, creating a nodal point that will target the whole system. So even the movement identified the system as a problem, the movement was revolved around a specific personal case. So the movement did not aim to transform or to change the system, nor it became a form of its side effect. So maybe I will stop here. So if there are any further questions, I will be available for answering them. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmin. And with this, we have reached the final part of our book, which is titled Toward Institutional Politics. And it's opening with a very interesting historical case presented in the chapter Yugoslav Self-Management as a Model of Participatory Municipal Governance, Local Communities in Belgrade in the 1980s. To tell us more about it, here is the author, Mladen Ostojić.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having organized this book launch and for having hosted me when I was doing this research. So as the title suggests, this work looks back at Yugoslavia's experience in terms of promoting citizen engagement in local governance. As most of you will probably know, Yugoslavia had a specific model of self-managed socialism as opposed to the state model, the state socialism, which was dominant in Eastern Europe at the time. And a lot has been written on how workers' self-management worked at the level of the socially owned enterprise. But less is known on how it worked at the political level, and especially in local governance, which is a shame, really, because Yugoslavia is one of the states, probably one of the states that went the furthest in terms of decentralizing political power, to the extent that some have argued that this led to the withering away. A lot to be learned out of it. So this chapter really looked at how self-management was designed at the municipal level through focus on local communities, which stand for mesne zajednice in Serbo-Croatian, which was an institution that aimed to promote direct citizen involvement in decision-making at the local level. So the first part, can you hear me, or it's frozen for me? Right.
Can hear, it's okay.
Ah, la connexion.
But we can hear you.
Hello?
I think Mladen cannot hear us, so I'll just type in the chat.
Sorry, I'm gonna get. Can you hear me now or not? So if you can hear me, okay. So yeah, I said so. The work.
And we lost Mladen. I don't see him among participants anymore. So I think the best would be to move on to the next chapter. And if Mladen comes back, then he will have the opportunity to finish his presentation. But let's move on to chapter 10 already. Norming Participatory Practices of Movement Parties in Southeast Europe by Irena Fiket, Gazela Pudar-Draško, and Jelena Vasiljević, all colleagues of mine from the Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory. And now we will hear from Jelena.
Thank you, Čedo. Hi, everyone. It's lovely to see you all, and it's lovely to see the book out. So can you hear me? Loud and clear, thanks. So what we analyze and what we compare to a certain extent are two party movements from this region, and that is Možemo from Croatia and Green Left Front from Serbia. So why? And this is, of course, there are party movements, which is a recent, it's a very new political phenomenon in the region, and both Možemo and ZLF, Zeleno-Levi Front, and Green Left Front were formed from bottom-up social movements. So why this focus on party movements within this wider context of interest in democratic innovations? But because it is assumed that movement parties, in contrast to mainstream political parties, maintain a more horizontal structure based on a broad participation of its members. So in general, it is assumed that they are more democratic and that they can potentially restore severely shaken trust in electoral agents and political processes. So what is it that we focused on in particular? It's their statutes. So we analyzed the statutes of Možemo and Green Left Front to see how they conceive and implement their intra-party democratic principles in their highest normative acts. And their statutes also represent legal milestones in their evolution into national movement parties. So regarding the methodology, how we compare them, we conducted a deductive content analysis following the already developed model of von den Berg, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. So he and his co-authors, they developed this model, and they also includes qualitative coding and quantification that's necessary for building the internal party democracy index. And the analysis was based on three main categories of internal party democracy, and that is members' rights, organizational structure, and decision-making. So I don't have time to go into the details of the methodology, but to maybe go straight to some major findings is that regarding members' rights, we found that, for example, Green Left Front has better developed and embedded the principles of equal participation and has more open admission of the members to the party compared to Možemo. Then regarding organizational structure, Možemo structure reflects the structure of the movement, the social movement, whereas Green Left Front structure resembles the traditional party structures more. Finally, regarding the decision-making, Green Left Front has evolved into a national party that defines its procedures in a way that allows growth and potentially a mass party, whereas Možemo, on the other hand, retained its direct decision-making as the most important tool for the direct democracy. To the key difference between these two movements, parties' normative documents, point to the fact that Možemo relies on participatory democracy performed by carefully selected members, while Green Left Front is attempting to become a democratic party open to new membership with carefully balanced power centers. And such a structure will probably enable Green Left Front to grow faster, but also poses a challenge for putting the defined norms into practice. The weakest aspect of the internal party democracy in the normative frameworks of both movement parties is the decision-making processes, where we found that it is inclusive and participatory, but lacks a definition of how it is organized, which contributes to poor transparency of procedures and provides fertile ground for manipulation and potential creation of power centers. For maybe some more insights or for maybe some explanations why these differences occur, we can talk in the Q&A session. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jelena. And I can see that Mladen is back, so I just want to give him an opportunity to conclude his presentation.
Yeah, sorry, my network was down. Fingers crossed it won't happen again. So yeah, I wanted to check where did I stop? Until when could you hear me? Should I start all over again or not? I don't think so, right? I'll just assume that you've heard the first part. So yeah, the chapter looks at really focuses on the местные zajednice, on the local communities. And the idea is to explore, it explores the official thinking behind self-management in local governance and how they were designed by official decision makers. And then it looks more into details of the modus operandi of local communities. And finally, it explores the relationship between local communities, municipalities, and the city of Belgrade through a case study that looks at the introduction of the voluntary financial contribution, the sum of doprinos, in Belgrade in the early 1980s. And this case study suggests that while local communities effectively allowed citizens to take part in decision-making to some extent, they fell short of allowing for the flourishing of what the Yugoslav ideologists aimed for, which was a direct socialist democracy. So the idea behind that research was to give some inspiration and also draw some lessons for contemporary movements promoting direct democracy at the local level. And I'm trying to pursue further research in this field, notably through a comparative study on community-based institutions similar to the Mesne zajednice in 4 African countries. So this research will be launched in the coming months. And I'm looking for researchers who are interested and competent, who have experience in working in this field in Africa. So if you know of someone or if you're interested, please get in touch. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mladen. And we only have 1 chapter left in this section and in the entire book. And that chapter is titled Democratic Innovations in a Neoliberal Landscape, 3 Ideas from Hungary. Here to present is the lead author, Eszter Kovacs-Sitkay.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Cheda. And it's so nice to finally see you and everyone else. And first of all, thank you so much for organizing the whole volume and for all the work you've done with it, and for organizing this book launch. It's so good to, get connected with all the fellow colleagues here. So as for our chapter, I will be really short as we are the very last one. So with this chapter, we wanted to introduce how democratic innovations can work, and at the same time, how such legal institutions can be hollow in an illiberal environment. And in order to do so, 3 initiatives are presented here, which aim at renewing democracy in an illiberal framework, and can be regarded as a preliminary mapping of how democratic innovations can be established or operate and have an impact in such a challenging political environment. And regarding the examples presented here, these democratic innovations are initiated from 3 different directions, which constitute 3 different legal institutions. These are namely national consultations initiated by the government, primaries, especially focusing on the primaries for the opposition candidate for prime minister. It was initiated by the opposition parties. And last but not least, citizens' assemblies initiated by municipalities and civil society organizations. Each institution processes are introduced in that, giving a description and an assessment why we can say they are seemingly fulfilling all the formal requirements, but in a substantive way, they are ineffective in terms of, for example, their impact on policymaking, or how they are hollowed as they lost their initial aim or feature. And just to give you an idea about what I'm talking about, as for the national consultation, the process has lost its deliberative character over the years. And for the primary, the key policies and preferences of the united opposition in the campaign were determined by the leadership of the political parties, and not the citizens' will were actually presented or considered. And as for the citizens' assemblies, we can see that little tangible impact on politics and policy making can be observed, nor is there meaningful commitment from stakeholders to actually implement results of these assemblies. So this is our chapter. It is a brief snapshot of the current status of democratic innovations, and well, we really look forward to seeing how they will develop during the following years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Esther, and I hope you enjoyed listening to our contributors, and I hope these brief presentations have provided at least a glimpse into what you can expect from our book. I think it's a perfect time to remind you that there is a link to our book in open access, which you can find in the chat section. And it's also a perfect time to open the floor for questions. So if there is anything you would like to ask or discuss with our editors or contributors, please feel free to do so now. I don't see any raised hands, and it's very hard for me to believe that our presentations were not as engaging as I thought, and that you don't have any questions or comments for us. But maybe I'm wrong. Have I told you that the book is entirely open access? Yeah. Well, if there is no questions or comments, I think I see one raised hand, right? Sahib, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for the presentations. I came a little bit late, so I only heard from, I think, 20 past onwards. I actually had a question for the editors. So from the collection of chapters that you eventually collected and published, were there really nagging and curious questions that got opened up as a result of the chapters that you weren't aware or you weren't as attached to when you started the book? So new questions, new avenues, what emerged after having read some of the research?
Irena, would you like to start?
Because I lost the connection for a moment, can you please repeat the...
The question was whether any new avenues emerged after we collected the chapters. So upon editing and reading, so were there any avenues or new questions that emerged? I can say that for me, well, probably among the 4 editors, I was the one that was the least familiar with democratic innovations before coming to this exercise. And there were chapters like the one from Jovana and Eva on introducing deliberative forums into the urban planning procedures. From this chapter, I became aware of deliberative democracy as a method in all sorts of, social life. So not just very narrow political tool in policymaking, but I started thinking of deliberative democracy as a methodology in different spheres of life, including the research. So that really broadened up my perspective, I would say that. Another example I could mention was Mladen's chapter, and that historical look back into the procedures that we had and that we don't typically discuss in terms of, deliberative or participatory nomenclature, but they were there. And when we talk about innovations, we rarely talk about brand new practices or institutions. We're talking about practices or institutions that were introduced from a different context or even reinvented from the same historical background.
Mm-hmm. I'm a long time I'm in this topic, and I would, for example, I can say something that what came to me after we build the index and include all the authors, that we can learn a lot, but we didn't systematize this knowledge about the specificity of the actors who are actually promoting this kind of innovations. Both the social movements, we elaborated with the social movements and we connected to the literature about the social movements, but what kind of extra institutional actors also, like this case, once again, Johanna was exploring, what kind of actors are actually interested in doing that in this region. I think this is the topic we should cover in the next book we will publish, also online, but now you cannot publish that. But this is something I think we need to focus on in the next steps, for example.
Yeah, I can say from my perspective, because I was an editor and also Chadon and RB did a literature review of what was written about the topic earlier, that actually some of the gaps that we identified have been answered in some of the questions, which I found cool, because I didn't see this when we started, like, drafting the thing, but in the end, and certainly so there is no consensus in the literature, for instance, about about the effects that democratic innovations have in democratically challenging environments. So there are authors that are saying, yes, participation is good for participatory democracy, and there are those that say, well, it really depends what kind of service do they have, or what kind of function. And I think so. For instance, the chapter by the Hungarian chapter that you heard a lot from Esther, Daniel, and Bolliger really puts this dilemma together and gives us some empirical material to think this through. And also when we think about reinvigorating these old, these inherited models of direct democracy that we had in former Yugoslavia, I think Mladen's chapter is really good in making us see that the problems that we think we have now were actually present in the past. and so there is some continuity of the problem between, formal and informal, political participation. We have to understand better in order to design future institutions, future democratic institutions in our region. There is always this division between formal and informal that we somehow, stop considering, because it's hard to research it. The more I know about informal practices, that they are informal for a reason. They are shunning away from the limelight of researchers. So those were perhaps some of the main lessons learned that I had after reading all of the contributions.
Yeah, and thank you, Sahib. Thank you for this question and for giving us the opportunity to reflect on this experience. Yeah, I think we all learned a lot, and thank you so much for kicking off the Q&A session, because now I do see some raised hands, and I'm very happy to see them. Next is Calypso, I think.
Yes, thank you, Chedomir, and thank you all for an amazing, I can't wait to read the book. I can't believe you're giving it in free access. You could become rich here. Anyway, so I want to ask a kind of threefold question, but I mean, a bit following the previous one, which is to some extent about how we're all, academic activists in some ways, in between those worlds. And in some ways, I want to, hear you on the seeds of hope for the future. But so one is, the first bit of the questions is in the context of enlargement and the Copenhagen criteria trilogy and the, informal and formal, democracy conditionality. How much do you think we can all sell democratic innovation and what's happening in the region as, an answer? Given where it's coming from, given the deep state, given the resistance, and all of that. So how does this whole story help in the enlargement? Because we know that rule of law and democracy are going to be yet again, the biggest criteria, and yet totally unspelled out and blurred and with lots of double standards and hypocrisy. But the second part of my question has to do with something I think a lot about these days, what I call reversing the democratic gaze. And that, as in what, Europeans can learn from the rest of the world instead of always giving lessons to the rest of the world. We do it better, standards of civilization, etc. But I'm also thinking that, you know, reversing the gaze is not just Europeans vis-a-vis the rest of the world. It's, you know, arrogant Western Europeans looking at, you know, Southeastern Europeans, Eastern Europeans, and asking, wouldn't that be wonderful? You know, what lessons can we learn from this region, which we tend to patronize all the time? And this leads me to my, you know, well, part of that question has to do with the history that you were talking about, because, you know, I mean, so many of us on the kind of polycentric radical left of, you know, we're raised before the fall by autogestion in Yugoslavia and all of that world. So it's a history that is, you know, not only known by historians, but by, I mean, it's part of the political imaginary of at least the left, right? And at least the older left in Western Europe. And in a way, so you're harping back to that. We're harping back to that and what is happening. But in what, and to me, that's something that can be leveraged more politically in this kind of argument about reversing the gaze. And so, you know, that's and my final, and sorry, I'm using too much time, but the final version of my question has to do with where I'm speaking from these days, as some of you know very well, as one of the co-captains of the Democratic Odyssey. Some of you have even taken part in some of our conversation. And here the question is more vertical. So it's not so much what can the rest of Europe or EU people learn from Southeast Europe, but really, what can we learn vertically from all of this? I mean, democratic innovation happening in very difficult contexts to transnational. If we think of transnational citizen assembly and democratic innovation as translocal, you know, and that's very important, not a supranational floating above, but translocal. So yeah, sorry for this circumvoluted questions, but you can see how excited I am in hearing you all.
And thank you so much for that, Calypso. So there were several themes in your question and comments regarding enlargement and innovation. So their interconnection, reversing the democratic gaze, and leveraging on the history that there is. So questions of what Europe can learn from the region that is oftentimes taken for granted, and what lessons can be learned from history. And as you know, we have contributors from Bosnia, from Montenegro, from North Macedonia. If anyone would like to comment, maybe there are contributors who are not presenting. So if anyone would like to jump in and join this conversation, please feel welcome to do so.
Maybe I can start and then let people, just to say shortly that thank you, Calypso. Next time we will let you write our endorsement for the book, because there was one part you actually explain how valuable this is to give the contribution. I think it's really important. It's really important what actually that question, what Western Europe can learn from us. I think we delineate this very well in our book, and thank you for acknowledging that. So I think that you can see that in all chapters, actually. In the chapter Jelena presented, where we presented the internal practice of democratic movement parties, and then in all the chapters that talk about the social movement and internal praxis of the social movement, but also a chapter that dealt specifically with democratic innovations in sense of deliberative democratic innovation. But this is all I wanted to say, and I will just try to stimulate somebody else who can talk from the perspective of their own chapter.
Maybe I can give a comment on the part looking at the past. What can we learn from past experiences in Southeast Europe? I would agree with you that self-management was a part of the collective imaginary of the left and left activists up to some point, maybe in the past, maybe even nowadays, but to a very restricted and narrow, I would say, circle of people. Sadly, I would say that self-management is not at all any longer part of the collective imaginaries of the societies in the former Yugoslavia. Rather, it's been completely erased, completely forgotten, and it's something that we need to dig up again and promote and advertise what existed and what can be learned from it and what can be reused. And I would say, I mean, I would go back to what I said earlier. Even in the international academic literature in English, there are very few works on local communities or even municipal governance in Yugoslavia. This was something that was completely left on the side. There's a lot, obviously, in Serbo-Croatian, but most of these works are more like looking at what should be done in the future from that time's perspective and not like a synthesis of what has been done. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of work to be done in terms of digging up that past and reusing the lessons and experiences that existed then.
Maybe just to follow up on what Mladen is saying, I think we are kind of thinking along the same lines. If I think about the future and what this region could contribute, I think this sort of fusion of all the new is something that I'm really looking forward to, you know, having the institutions that we inherited from the previous generations, which could be like these local communities, which are just, you know, existing as a form. They don't really serve a purpose anymore, and then inserting democratic innovation inside them. So having citizen assemblies or using participatory budgeting in this, you know, framework that people are familiar with. I kind of hope that we will see this development in the next, you know, 5 or 10 years, and that this could be some kind of, you know, new thing that develops in this part of Europe. So I'm kind of optimistic that we will certainly try to. Whether it works, well, that's up to us to also evaluate whether it makes sense or not.
Can I contribute a bit?
Of course.
Yeah, just a micro fragment of what Calypso asked, basically. I'm not sure whether we should correlate in any case, in any given scenario, EU integration of the region with democratic innovation of rule of law, because the process is practically, from the perspective of North Macedonia, nowhere. I don't think that democratic innovation will in any form be a part of the rule of law criteria, although I'm not sure whether that you were suggesting that at all. And I don't think that the rule of law will play a crucial role in the whole process. I think that there are many other issues that have priority, and the latest developments has shown us that we are pretty much right. So, but democratic innovations are no less important in this regard. They're important for the region and for this cyclical democratic backsliding that's happening, and it's about to happen again in North Macedonia, for instance. But I really wouldn't correlate it to the European integration process, to the criterion, or to any kind of topics that are related to that. So basically, I just wanted to say that I see this phenomenon as pretty much separate. They are important, but not for that part of the story. That part of the story is obviously now in a completely different terrain of geopolitics and whatnot. And from the perspective of the candidate countries, which are pretty tired, there is an accession fatigue on our side as well, on the side of the EU. I think that nobody's contextualizing democratic innovation in this regard, which is a shame. But that doesn't make them really not important or less important. They are important because we will, until we get into the European Union, and maybe even after that, we'll need that as a part of the whole fighting for democracy story, which is always rejuvenated and renewed every 5 to 10 years, because we tend to fall back into some kind of autocracy, semi-autocracy nice sugar-coated autocracy, but autocracy in any scenario. So basically, that was my intervention. Thank you.
Maybe I can say also something. Do you hear me?
Yeah, please go ahead, Valida.
Okay. Yeah, for the context of Bosnia and Herzegovina, it is we saw this project and everything that we analyzed and we tried to promote. We see that as a way of resistance in such a complex consociational system where we don't have any space or any opportunity to change and to reinvent our position. It is really complex and fixed political system that is for 3 decades creating a deep captured state, looking into the potential of social movements and potential of any kind of democratic innovation for us is a light, is something that is a real resistance that is coming from the ordinary people. So I see the significance in this. Of course, it is the part of a broader process and EU perspective, but for us it was important really to see why so many social movements and protests failed in last decade, what went wrong, and we just choose some of them that had the potential of trans-ethnic, trans-border cooperation, and we choose those who last for several years. Unfortunately, we didn't find any kind of articulated innovation, but only a pure fight, a pure resistance of ordinary people, intellectuals, and so on, that has to continue. So that was our approach. We just wanted, as an academia, to give a contribution to this resistance. Okay.
Thank you, Valida. Thank you, Calypso, for this inspiring question, and thank you to everyone who contributed. I don't see any more raised hands, so let me just check if there are any other questions or comments. I think that Q&A session went into the direction of what failed in the region, how democratic innovations were not conducted or established with the expected results, how there are lessons to be learned from the past, but we didn't care to learn them. But I think that obviously we talk about all these failures in our book, but we also do talk about some examples that actually worked, and some lessons that we learn and that we can implement in the future, which gives us I would say a lot of hope and a lot of potential for us. As I think most of us, obviously all of us, are academics, but there are many of us here who are also practitioners. So our book, I think, contributes to the both sides. I think there is something I hope there is something to be learned from it, and I think it can be put to practical use. And if there are no further questions or comments, I want to thank you all for joining us today. And of course, special thanks to our contributors, to the team at Routledge, our reviewers, proofreaders, and everyone else involved in the creation of this book. We hope you will give it a read and find it insightful and useful. Thank you very much once again, and goodbye.
Thank you.